The cold did not care. It sliced through the trees like glass, indifferent to life. Snow weighed down every branch, muffling sound, turning the forest into a world of silence and death. The wind curled through the pines with claws of ice, and beneath that frozen canopy, a lone wolf moved like a shadow carved from smoke and frost. Her breath steamed in the air as she limped forward, body tense, ribs pressing against her skin. She had not eaten in days. Blood clung to the fur on her rear leg where an old wound refused to close. Her golden eyes, dulled by fatigue but not defeat, scanned the endless white. She was not hunting now. She had no time for prey. Her purpose was far more urgent. Tucked against her chest in the folds of her thick fur were two pups, barely old enough to walk. One whimpered faintly, the other didn't move. Their bodies were stiff, breath thin, if present at all. She nosed them every few paces, but nothing changed. The warmth of her own body could no longer fight the creeping cold stealing into their tiny limbs. She had never been this close to the boundary before. The scent of man was strong now, oil, fire, metal. It had always meant danger. But instinct had bent to something deeper, stranger. Somewhere, buried beneath the layers of beast and nature, a thread of understanding had surfaced. She had watched the humans from a distance. Seen them create fire at will, carry warmth in their dens, feed their young from strange metal bowls. She had seen a child once, fall in the snow and scream. A man had come running. Lifted the child. Held them. That moment had clung to her. It meant something. Now she crossed that invisible line between forest and human world. Her paws crunched on gravel. Ahead, a low building squatted among heaps of rusted metal. Light spilled from its window, dull orange, flickering. Smoke curled from a crooked chimney. Her steps slowed. Her head low. Her body trembled with effort and uncertainty. She moved carefully, every step deliberate. One pup stirred slightly at her chest. Encouraged, she pressed on. Her breath quickened. She reached the door. It loomed high above her, solid and weathered. The scent of man was thick here, but not threatening. There was something else, too, oil, yes, but layered with warmth. Wood smoke. Diesel. Heated rubber. And food. Not the kind that came from prey. The kind humans made, stored, used to survive winters far worse than this. She placed the limp bodies down at the threshold, arranged them carefully, and stepped back. Not far. Just enough. Her ears twitched. Inside there were sounds, metal clinking, the buzz of something electrical, and footsteps. She could not afford to fear them. A muffled voice rose, grumbling. Then footsteps neared. The door creaked open. Light spilled out, blinding and golden. The man stood framed in it, tall, heavy-jacketed, bearded. His eyes were sharp, then widened. He froze. For a long moment, the world held its breath. The woman in wolf skin did not growl. Did not flee. She only looked at him, and then at her pups. Once. Slowly. The man stepped forward, cautious but unarmed. His boots crunched in the snow. He looked down at the pups. The smaller one was motionless, tongue protruding. The other shivered once, then stopped. A muttered curse. The man knelt. His hands moved quickly, checking for signs of life. He touched the side of one pup's face. Then he looked up at the wolf. There was no logic here. No reason. Just a silent agreement between two worlds that had rarely spoken without blood. The man lifted both pups gently, cradling them against his chest, and turned. The door stayed open. The mother followed. Not a word was spoken. Not a growl was heard. Just the wind behind them, howling at their backs. And as the door closed behind her, the cold stayed outside. For the first time in days, the pups were warm. And the forest was behind her. Joe had seen wolves before, usually through a rifle scope or from a distance during the winter drives, but never like this. Not one waiting at his door. Not one asking for help. His brain fought to assign logic, but instinct moved faster. He carried the pups into the warmth, laying them carefully on a wool blanket near the stove. The larger one was barely breathing. The smaller had no pulse. He checked again, lips pressed in a hard line. Gone. His hands hovered over the other, unsure. Then urgency took over. He grabbed the heating pad from the workbench, plugged it into the wall, and wrapped the surviving pup in layers of cloth. Temperature mattered. Too fast, and it'd be shock. Too slow, and it'd slip away. He didn't bother changing out of his grease-covered jacket. No time. He'd kept things alive before, machines, mostly, but now it was flesh, breath, fragile warmth. It was different. He glanced at the wolf, still just inside the threshold, her chest rising fast but eyes fixed on him. She didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She didn't move. He half expected her to lunge the moment he touched her young. But she didn't. She let him work. Joe adjusted the stove, adding more fuel, raised the temperature in the room. He flipped a shop lamp on and moved it close. The pup let out a twitch. Still here. Still fighting. That's all he needed. Without looking at her, he muttered, "You're either the smartest dumb animal I've ever met, or the dumbest smart one." She gave no reaction. Her eyes stayed on the blanket. On the motionless bundle wrapped tight. He didn't ask why. He didn't wonder how she knew where to go. That didn't matter. What mattered was heat, time, and the slim chance that this little body hadn't given up yet. He unzipped a duffel under the bench, pulling out a small emergency med kit. A relic from a past life, half-expired antibiotics, saline, glucose packets, gauze. Enough for now. He dissolved the glucose in a small syringe, carefully applying it to the edge of the pup's mouth. A minute passed. Then 2. A twitch in its paw. The chest rose slightly. Then again. Joe exhaled, slow and controlled. He rubbed his palm over his face and looked at the mother again. "We're not out of the woods yet, sweetheart," he muttered. Still nothing from her. But her stance shifted just slightly, tension easing from her shoulders. He moved fast after that, setting up a corner of the shop into an improvised warming station. A metal toolbox flipped sideways became a shelter. A heating lamp overhead. A wrapped jug of warm water next to the pup to mimic body heat. He watched the temperature like a hawk, adjusting, waiting. The pup's breathing deepened, bit by bit. It wasn't comfort, but survival. Joe knew the difference. Once he was sure the basics were covered, he turned his attention to the mother. Her front paw was lifted slightly. Blood crusted over the fur. He approached slowly, watching for the flinch, the warning. It didn't come. He knelt, reached out. She let him touch her. His hands, worn and callous from years of metal and fuel, moved with unnatural gentleness. He cleaned the wound with a warm rag. A piece of metal had embedded in the skin, probably from broken ground or fencing. He removed it with tweezers, dabbed antiseptic, and wrapped the paw with gauze from the same old med kit. No growl. No snap. Only quiet cooperation. The air smelled of pine sap, oil, blood, and something new, trust. He finished, stood, and took a step back. "You're tougher than you look," he said. "And I've seen some damn tough things." She lowered her head slightly, then settled near the pup. Not too close. Just enough to see. Enough to know. Joe didn't sleep that night. He paced. Checked temperatures. Listened to the rhythm of breathing that filled the space between man and animal. He hadn't felt this kind of fear in years. The kind that made you pray to gods you didn't believe in. Not for yourself, but for something small. Something helpless. By morning, the pup moved on its own. Weakly. But alive. And Joe, a man who hadn't smiled in a long time, let out a single, quiet laugh. Not because it was funny. But because, for once, something broken had come back. By the second day, the pup could lift its head. Not much more than a twitch, but it was there. A signal. Joe adjusted the heat lamp again, swapped the water jug for a fresh warm one, and dropped another log into the stove. The room held steady warmth now, not just for survival but for healing. He didn't talk much, only short murmurs as he worked. It was the kind of quiet that carried purpose. The mother stayed near the wall, eyes always on her pup. She ate what he gave her, raw scraps from the freezer, eggs, even canned meat. She sniffed everything before accepting it, testing him each time. But she never refused. When he moved close, she tensed, but never struck. It wasn't submission. It was caution tempered by something more precise, discernment. Joe cleaned the pup twice a day, wiping down its body with a damp cloth, checking for signs of infection. He trimmed a cracked claw, applied ointment to a scuffed paw pad, and monitored hydration. Every time he touched the pup, the mother watched without blinking. Trust remained fragile, but it was there, reinforced with each careful movement. By the third night, the pup whimpered, soft, weak, but deliberate. It tried to crawl, pulling itself an inch across the blanket. Joe didn't interfere. It had to fight on its own now. He sat beside them, back against the wall, boots scuffed with grime, staring into the orange glow of the stove. His thoughts drifted to another winter. A different blanket. A girl's cough in the dark, and the long hours between breaths. His hands had been just as steady then, but helpless. He reached into the drawer beside him, pulled out a lighter and an old photo, creased, nearly faded. A girl with wind-tangled hair. She'd loved animals. Wolves, especially. He looked at the pup, now curled against the warmth. If there was anything of her left in this world, it had just taken the shape of a second chance. On the fourth morning, he found the mother limping worse. The paw wound had reopened. Infection had started to creep up the leg. He prepared an antibiotic injection from his emergency stash, risking what little was left. He approached slowly, syringe ready. The moment she saw it, she growled low, almost silent. He didn't stop. Just knelt, arm extended. "You want to raise that pup, you let me do this," he said calmly. His voice didn't shake. After a long pause, she lowered her head and didn't move again. The needle slid in clean, and she didn't even flinch. The transformation wasn't sudden. It came in tiny pieces. The pup barked, just once, on the fifth day. Joe blinked, halfway through adjusting a thermostat. The sound cut through the shop like a bullet, small but alive. That afternoon, he built a low rail around the blanket, giving the pup space to walk but not wander too far. It tried. Failed. Tried again. The mother began to sleep for short stretches. Not fully, but enough to show relief. Joe noticed her posture changing, no longer stiff with fear, but alert with purpose. She still didn't seek him out, but she no longer backed away when he approached. By the sixth day, the pup licked Joe's fingers. He froze, surprised by how small its tongue was, how soft its eyes had become. It didn't understand what he was. It only knew warmth, food, and safety had his scent. That night, while the pup slept, Joe took the old blanket and laid it under the workbench. He stacked small wooden blocks around it, padded the corners, built a raised platform using spare parts from a broken engine tray. He even added a small heat lamp on a timer. A den, not a cage. Not a kennel. A place. The mother sniffed it, walked around it twice, then settled in. She lay there for hours, curled around the pup. Joe didn't bother them. What formed between them wasn't affection in any familiar sense. It was something colder, sharper, respect forged by necessity, tempered by effort. A balance neither had chosen, but both had accepted. For the first time in a long while, nothing in the room needed fixing. It was just growing. Quietly, stubbornly, and against every odd. By the seventh day, the snow outside had thickened into a wall of white, muffling the world beyond the shop. Inside, time moved differently, measured in breaths, in tiny recoveries, in the unspoken rhythm shared between man and animal. The pup now stood on shaky legs, stumbling but determined, its eyes open and alert. It nuzzled the mother, squeaked softly, and occasionally sniffed Joe's boots when he got close. Curiosity had replaced fear. Joe had stopped questioning it. The logic behind this strange alliance had faded into routine. He cleaned the floors, refilled the water dish, made sure the heating lamps cycled properly. His toolbox, once stacked with cold steel, now shared space with folded towels and feeding syringes. His shop had become a sanctuary, not by design but by choice. The mother's injury had begun to close. The swelling had gone down. She still favored the paw but moved with more confidence, her gait steady enough to circle the space each morning. She inspected everything: food bowls, bedding, the oil drum at the corner. Always alert, but no longer defensive. Her eyes didn't track Joe like a threat anymore. They watched him like a partner. When Joe opened the side door for a breath of fresh air, she didn't bolt. She stepped outside briefly, scanned the woods, then returned without coaxing. The forest still called her, but she wasn't ready to answer it. Not yet. Her pup had made this place something more than shelter, it had become necessary. Each night, Joe kept notes on a scrap pad, observations about the pup's movement, the mother's recovery, temperature patterns in the shop. He wasn't a vet, not even close, but he treated the process like a repair job. Measure, test, adjust. Some things didn't change, whether it was an engine or a heartbeat. He started leaving the radio on during work. Low volume, just enough to cut the silence. Country songs, local news, old baseball reruns. The pup didn't seem to notice. The mother would perk up at sudden voices but didn't react beyond that. Occasionally, Joe talked while cleaning tools or replacing filters in the generator. Not full conversations, just half-formed thoughts spoken out loud. About weather, repairs, memories. He didn't expect answers. But it filled the space. On the 10th day, the pup barked at its own reflection in a metal panel. Joe laughed once, short and surprised. It startled the pup. The mother lifted her head but didn't move. That night, Joe left a bit of cooked meat near her corner. She didn't touch it until he left the room, but it was gone by morning. Things began shifting in small ways. The pup explored beyond the blanket. The mother stopped watching every move. Joe built a low ramp so the pup could climb onto a platform near the window. It stared out for long stretches, tail twitching slowly, eyes following the movement of wind through trees. The mother began sleeping more deeply. Her breathing slowed, her limbs less tense. She let the pup crawl over her freely. Occasionally, she licked its ear or guided it back when it wandered too far. The protective edge hadn't vanished, it had simply softened. She knew it was safe here. Joe never named them. It didn't feel right. They weren't pets, weren't his to claim. But he'd begun to think in terms of them, how they would react, what they might need next. His days, once organized around repairs and isolation, were now shaped by shared presence. A week later, the pup barked at Joe and wagged its tail. Not a greeting, more like a challenge. Joe crouched down, extended a hand. The pup sniffed, backed away, then came forward again. Contact came in the form of a nose bump. Quick, cautious, but real. The mother didn't intervene. Something had changed. Not just survival. Not just recovery. It had become a mutual understanding. A life shared, however briefly. No dominance. No control. Only coexistence. Joe knew it wouldn't last forever. He didn't expect it to. But each moment built towards something undeniable, an echo of connection not formed by species, but by circumstance, grit, and something wordless that neither man nor wolf could explain. The day came without warning. The mother stood near the door before sunrise, her body still, head high, tail lowered in silence. Joe noticed the shift immediately, the way her gaze lingered not on the pup, but on the world beyond the walls. She wasn't anxious. She was ready. He didn't speak. Words would have meant nothing. Instead, he poured warm water into the bowl, checked the pup's paw pads one last time, and waited. The pup, now alert and agile, circled the room with ease. Its strength had returned fully, legs steady beneath it, eyes bright with the kind of energy Joe had grown to expect each morning. It darted toward the workbench, sniffed an empty can, then turned to its mother, sensing something different. She didn't move, but the look she gave was enough. The pup paused, then padded to her side and sat quietly. Joe opened the door slowly. Cold rushed in, crisp and sharp. Snow had crusted over the drifts outside, but the wind had calmed. Trees swayed gently in the distance, branches no longer sagging with ice. Winter hadn't ended, but it had softened just enough. She stepped forward, the pup trailing behind. Joe didn't stop them. He stood at the doorway, one hand on the frame, the other loose at his side. The mother glanced back once. Not long. Just enough to mark the moment. The pup followed her into the snow, leaving behind the warmth, the tools, the walls that had become familiar. He watched them disappear between the pines, two moving forms folding into the wilderness like they never left it. No farewell. No hesitation. Only motion. Purpose. What had been given was never claimed. What had been shared was never spoken. Joe stood there long after they vanished. He scanned the treeline, not expecting their return, but anchoring himself to the space they'd left. The shop behind him suddenly felt larger, emptier. The blankets remained on the floor. The water bowls sat half full. He didn't move them. The next day, he fixed the ramp the pup had worn loose from climbing. Then he cleaned the corner where the mother had slept, slow and deliberate. Not to erase her presence, just to preserve the quiet. He placed the heating lamp back on its shelf and unplugged it, but didn't store it away. Work resumed. He replaced the generator fan, patched a rusted snowplow, rewired the broken radio for clearer reception. The silence no longer felt hollow. It was familiar now, filled with echoes. A week passed. Tracks appeared near the edge of the woods, small, light, precise. Not close to the shop. Not encroaching. Just present. A sign, maybe? A confirmation that survival had continued. He didn't follow them. He didn't need to. Days turned. The weather shifted. The worst of winter loosened its grip. Trees no longer groaned under frost. Snowmelt trickled in narrow rivulets along the gravel path. Joe continued working. But something had changed in his routine. When he passed the blanket folded near the stove, he paused. When he saw paw prints hardened in old mud outside the door, he let them be. Months later, in early spring, he spotted a shadow between the trees. Not close. Not lingering. A flicker of movement, then gone. He didn't chase it. But he smiled faintly, one corner of his mouth lifting before it vanished again. What they'd shared couldn't be measured by ownership or memory. It hadn't been a rescue. It hadn't been charity. It was survival, made possible by two beings who met in the middle of need, and neither turned away. Joe returned to his bench and picked up his tools. The shop hummed with familiar noise. Machines roared back to life under his hands. But every so often, when the wind was quiet and the trees stood still, he paused. Out there, a pup ran strong beside its mother. Not a pet. Not a story. Just real. And here, inside the quiet workshop, a man who once fixed machines remembered what it felt like to mend something that breathed.